Three-hit passives, it's a term you see being thrown around every now and then, usually with a negative connotation. Out of all the different mechanics present in League of Legends, three-hit passives are among the more noticeable ones. When Akshan was released, the comments were littered with mentions of his three-hit passive. Not just him too, there are so many 1, 2, 3 type attacks that are thought of as lazy or uncreative ways to design champions. So I figured it would be worthwhile to talk about why are there so many of them in the game. If players vocally express how copy-paste they feel, why does Riot keep implementing them? Among other things, that's the main topic for today. So let's go ahead and dive into the design of three-hit passives in League of Legends. Why are there so many of them? Is it simply because Riot is lazy, or is there a practical benefit to having them in the game? But first, a word from our sponsor, FaceCheck once again. FaceCheck is an overlay program found on Overwolf, which I'm sure most of you have by now, that provides you with a lot of information to make it easier for you to approach each and every game you play. For example, while in Champ Select, it gives you a list of stats for every player on your team. So if you're the type of person to look up every player to see who's autofilled, now you don't have to, because FaceCheck gives you a profile of each teammate, and as for yourself, you get to set runes and item builds for whatever champion you plan to play. While in game, it brings up the same rundown of every player on the enemy team, so you can find out which person's on a losing streak or if they have a smurf you have to be careful for. I mentioned this in the past, but one of my favorite things about the app is that it shows you damage spread, how much estimated physical, magic, and true damage to expect so you can itemize accordingly. When the game is done, you get a detailed analysis on your personal performance in comparison to how your lane opponent did and more, just to check out what you were doing poorly at in order to improve. It's a fantastic app that you can easily tag onto your client through Overwolf, so check out the link on screen or in the description if you're interested. Really helps out the channel, but for now, let's get back into the video. As per usual with all these mechanical discussions, we have to first explain the subject in question. A three-hit passive is an ability component that achieves an additional effect for either the champion or the target enemy that champion is interacting with upon landing or using 3 hits and/or attacks. It's actually an umbrella term used to describe any metric that relies on a tally counter, and beyond the ones that are no-brainers, you'd be surprised just how many champions have something similar, even though not many people imagine it. It doesn't have to exclusively be attacks either, abilities are almost always brought into the equation as well. For the sake of simplicity, let's bring up a standard 3-hit passive, Vayne's Silver Bolts. Basic attacks on hit and condemn apply a stack of silver bolts on a single target, 3 stacks deal additional max health true damage. The tally count is placed on the enemy in this case, and is visually represented by a silver circle. In this case, these are target-centric 3-hit passives, and ones that people associate with the term. Akshan, Brand, Braum, Darius, Echo, Garen, Gnar, Kennen, Sejuani, Talon, Vayne, Vel'Koz, Vi, and technically Kai'Sa, although for her you need 5 attacks instead of 3. The Keystone Press the Attack is also here as well. Then we have player-centric 3-hit passives, which have an additional effect after 3 basic attacks or uses of an ability. But unlike the previous one, the tally is kept on the casting champion. An example of this would be Diana's Moonsilver Blade, where upon attacking twice, her 3rd hit will cause her next basic attack to deal additional magic damage in an area around her. You might be asking, why does it matter if it's counted on the champion or whoever they're attacking? The answer is simple, burst. A well-known trade pattern among Jack's mains is to attack minions twice to build up his 3rd attack, then use Empower to boost his damage even further. These are also much harder to keep track of as the opponent. Some of them don't even have visual indicators. Champions don't necessarily have to activate this passive in 3 hits, it can be any number. Caitlyn, Diana, Jax, Irelia, even Jhin to an extent. Kayle, Master Yi, Mordekaiser, Neeko, Nocturne, Twisted Fate, Udyr, Volibear, and the Wind brothers Yasuo and Yone. You may have noticed that I included persistent effects too. Irelia, Kayle, Mordekaiser, and Volibear each have passives that require a set number of attacks and abilities to be used to increase their power, and can last indefinitely so as long as they remain in combat. Caitlyn is also someone who very few consider to be part of the 3-hit passive club. Her headshot requires 6 to activate, but it has the same basic principle as everyone else's. That and when she's in her brush, it actually does become a 3-hit passive. That's not the end of it either. The 3rd group is called activated 3-hit passives, where upon usage of an ability, the champion's next few attacks, usually 3, can achieve an additional effect. Sometimes they directly empower the attacks, others cause a temporary 3-hit passive. Sivir demonstrates this mechanic. Her W Ricochet augments her next 3 attacks to boomerang onto nearby targets. Activated 3-hit passives can usually cause way more damage in a shorter time frame than target or player-centric ones, but it comes at the cost of there being a fixed time to do so. That includes Ahri, Cho'Gath, Evelynn, Jace, Kindred, Rek'Sai, Shen, Sivir as we mentioned, Tristana, Xin Zhao, and Zoe. I'm willing to bet good money you didn't expect to see this many champions to fall under the 3-hit passive category. Yes, if we get really technical, even Darius's Hemorrhage or Evelynn's Hate Spike are part of this list. If you thought there were too many champions before, almost a quarter out of all 158 champions to date have won in some way, shape, or form. It's not like they're the biggest culprit either. How many champions in the game have heals, how many have shields, how many have dashes? Those numbers are far higher in comparison. I'm not trying to excuse Riot's tendency to give them to every champion, but the prevalence of 3-hit passives isn't really a new thing, and it's been around for a very long time. With all that said, we can finally answer the question, why are there so many of them? What's up with the game's obsession with giving champions a 1, 2, 3 or a stacking mechanic in the first place? That is a multi-layered question because it depends on what angle you're approaching this from. I'll try to cover as many points as possible, but if you're looking for a TLDR, 3-hit passes are an easy and somewhat effective way to add persistent, timed, or delayed pressure depending on how they're used. Traditional game sense dictates the stronger or more impactful an attack, the more conditional it should be to balance it out, and you can see this on display in a lot of global abilities, namely the teleports. Pantheon, Galio, Shen, Twisted Fate, and Talia can cover very long distances in a short time, but the enemy team is usually given some indication that danger is imminent and to expect the arrival of another potential threat. But those are all ultimates. What about basic abilities? That's where 3-hit passives come into play. What are the two balancing components of them? One is the time it takes to activate it, and the other is the time you have to use it. For target and player-centric 3-hit passives, you can acquire a huge boost in damage or pressure, but only after meeting a certain condition, and while some are able to achieve that much faster than others, it still requires time, no matter how small. Sometimes the entire method of counterplay revolves around a champion's 3-hit passive. How do you beat Darius, Irelia, Mordekaiser, and Kayle? Don't let them stack up. Either burst them quickly or poke them in the neutral then dip out before they force an all-in. Persistent pressure. How do you beat Sejuani, Kennen, Talon, and Vel'Koz? Dodge as many abilities as possible since most of their pressure comes from activating that passive. If Talon misses his W, he loses a lot of burst damage, same with Vel'Koz. If he doesn't activate Organic Deconstruction, then his ultimate doesn't deal true damage. Delayed pressure. How do you beat Kindred, Tristana, Shen, and Sivir? Disengage from them to stall out their passive. Tristana's explosive charge at full stacks can easily do over 1000 damage in a large area towards the late game, but without it, she doesn't do a whole lot. 3-hit passives essentially serve to help players recognize the champion's threat capacity at a basic level. Like I said before, it's hard to keep track of every little thing going on in a game, so it gives you something to focus on. In a way, they're a lot like super ultimates, champions with a mechanic that when neutralized is really all you had to worry about. Granted, it applies greater importance to some champions and less to others. You don't really think about Evelyn's hate spike so much as you do her charm, whiplash, and ultimate one-shot, but for others it takes control of their entire playstyle. Vayne can theoretically shred through any champion, be they squishy or tanky, but it takes time for her to do so. That means tanks or frontline units will consider her public enemy number 1 as she's likely the most dangerous opponent for them at that present moment. This dynamic affects every facet and every stage of a match, from all-in battles to interactions in the neutral. This may be seen as effortless ways to make a champion stronger than they should be, but if you look at it from a different angle, it's also a way for inexperienced players to unknowingly become more predictable. They might tunnel vision on that mechanic. Just like how super ultimates are the be-all end-all for Fiddlesticks, Bard, Amumu, Illaoi, and such, 3-hit passives can and usually are the same for its champions. Let's go over how they influence the laning phase, when their strengths and weaknesses are the most noticeable. In the top lane, when Shen activates his Q, he'll look to trade blows with you since he has a shield to absorb your damage while he does a lot of damage to you. That might result in him making a beeline towards you, which you can then bait out by waiting for his shield to expire, as well as his Q timer to run low before starting the trade, when his window has run its course. In the mid lane, when Yasuo primes his third Q, you can adjust your position accordingly to minimize the chances of him knocking you up. Stay far away from him to give yourself more time to dodge the tornado, or get away from your minions so he can't dash knockup. In the bot lane, Jhin typically uses his first 3 bullets on the minion to use his force shot and a Q for quick burst damage before running away. The two of you can use that to your advantage by engaging him since there's only one left in the chamber. No matter how quickly a champion can get their 3-hit passive, it will always take longer than a single attack, thus preventing those champions from being able to blast you to pieces outright. In exchange, they open up the door for trades and all-ins. Furthermore, it presents a win condition for the player. Since Vayne's power lies in her 3-hit passive, it's in the player's best interest to itemize in a way that gets her as many applications of Silver Bolts as possible, leading to a meaningful and satisfying power spike. Once she gets her mythic item and Rage Blade, she's able to theoretically outduel anyone. Despite being someone who attacks very fast, Jax builds Spellblade items since his 3-hit passive can be used for quick burst. Auto 1, Auto 2, boom. Auto 1, Auto 2, boom. Same thing with Echo. Z-Drive Resonance allows for him to employ hit and run attacks. Phase Dive, Protobelt attack, Time Winder, then a second attack before ulting out. Then again, there's a lot of nuance to the whole thing. For a champion like Vayne, Silver Bolts direct her entire gameplay. You couldn't imagine the same champion without it. She is Silver Bolts. On the other hand, for a champion like Neeko or Akshan, their 3-hit passives feel kind of unnecessary. Sure, without the bonus damage, they will be significantly weaker, but in terms of the actual experience of playing a champion, there's no tangible reason why they should even have one. To that, I agree, it does feel very shoehorned in, especially on someone who can strike twice per auto attack. Maybe one could argue that Akshan's is necessary since he lacks an effective all-in and plays more like Echo, a hidden runner, but in fairness he feels like a messy hodgepodge of several champions put together. That's kind of the whole joke behind him. In the past, when I brought up 3-hit passives, the reason I gave for why I think they're not the most interesting mechanic is because the thing itself doesn't actually have any skill expression involved, as in, the act of using a 3-hit passive comes as a bonus to doing what you've been wanting to do anyway. I keep going back to Vayne, but she has the most iconic one. What is the goal of a marksman? To shoot anything that moves, right? That was what Vayne was already gonna do in the first place, so it comes off a little gratuitous to give one champion more reward for doing something than another. I did give that whole spiel about 3-hit passives incentivizing a playstyle, but I mean so does every other mechanic in the game in the grand scheme of things. For example, empowered abilities, which I posted not too long ago, force the player to actively consider which ability to use next, each with very different outcomes. Activated 3-hits may have more depth to their usage than target or player-centric ones, but even then there are other timing-focused attacks that don't require 3-hits to do so. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but Camille's Precision Protocol is a good example of that. It's 2 extra attacks, but the second one has a delay in between and a very short casting time frame of its own. I will forever denounce your Q as a crime against humanity, but conceptually it's pretty creative when it comes to the notion of patience and precision. If we're looking for a Vayne equivalent, Fiora's Duelist Dance, while also ridiculously unbalanced, demands much more thought and positioning relative to her opponent as opposed to attacking someone 3 times. In that sense, it does feel like a lazy attempt at giving champions more power without thinking of more skill-expressive ways to do so. 3-hit passes are a staple game mechanic in League of Legends, and will likely continue to be for as long as it's around. However, it does give off the impression that the champion design team either ran out of ideas, time, or budget and decided to just throw in a 3-hit passive, which I and I'm sure many of you regard as the basest form of skill expression in the game, the bare minimum. The League community's prevailing sentiment towards 3-hit passives is a lot like the Smash Bros community's aversion to sword characters, for much of the same reasons too. For those who don't follow the scene, last year there was a DLC fighter released that featured Pyra and Mithra from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and it became very clear that they were incredibly powerful, potentially even being the best characters in the game. Their high success rate and overloaded kit spawned irritation and disappointment from spectators, viewing them as less fun to watch when compared to more combo-heavy or playmaking fighters like Joker, Zero Suit Samus, Roy, Wolf, etc. It's not just those two either, there's an entire meme about how Smash Ultimate has too many sword characters who all have the same attacks and play a lot like the same way. Mind you, Smash Bros and League are 2 totally different genres and can't be compared to each other, but I could see a parallel of sorts when it comes to 3-hit passives. At its core, it's a necessary game mechanic, but should there be that many champions with it? Probably not. Sometimes I wonder what a champion would look like if theirs was changed into something different, and then I remember there used to be someone, 2 people rather. Anyone remember old Aatrox? Blood Price and Bloodwell were both 3-hit passes, and they were removed completely. Then again, the entire champion was straight up deleted from the game. We do have the other one though, Mordekaiser. I suggest you check out my rework retrospective on him for more detail, but his passive, Darkness Rise, where he gets a big circle of doom after 3 attacks, used to be an activated ability called Harvesters of Sorrow, where he would tag himself and an allied minion or champion with the circle. If those 2 circles connected, it would start dealing massive damage over time to all enemies within either one. And upon recast, it would do a burst of damage and heal both him and whoever he tagged based on the number of enemies hit. That's the one thing Mordekaiser mains were really salty about losing because it was the only real element in his kit with skill expression. It would be interesting to see someone like Twisted Fate change out his stacked deck for something with a bit more playmaking potential, or perhaps swap out Neeko's 3-hit passive with something that interfaces with a decoy clone. That'd be cool. Anyways, I think we're gonna end it off here. I hope this was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. Let me know in the comments, by the way, if you have ideas for changing a champion's 3-hit passive, what would they be? Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave a like, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to follow my channel for more content like this, and consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my previous mechanics discussions if you haven't yet. For now, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next episode. Take care.